and welcome to the January 2021 reading in the David Shove Memorial Midstream Reading Series. My name is Don Brunnquell, and I'm one of the coordinators of the series, originated by our friend, late David Shove. So we're glad you could join us tonight. The readings were organized by David until he passed away over a year and a half ago, and hosted by John Kolstad in his lovely funky second floor space on Lake Street. We've now moved to Zoom, and the Zoom chat function will be open during the reading, but the readers will not be following the chat while they read. Tonight, our authors are Mike Finley, who was set to read in September but passed away in August, and his work will be read by his wife Rachel Frazin and their friend Rebecca Ramstead. And Janine Ollette, John Minczeski, and Norita Dittberner-Jax. And I will introduce each of them before they read. First, let me tell you a bit how this will work. After the general introduction, I'll read a brief poem, as David did, to open each reading and warm up the audience, especially in these winter months when people used to venture out of their warm nests to hear poetry. I'll then introduce the first reader, who will read for 10 to 15 minutes, and during each poet's reading, all microphones except that of the reader will be muted. And after each reader, we invite you to give some visual applause in whatever way you do that. I'll then introduce the next reader until there's, again, a brief period for visual applause, and so on. At the end of the reading, all microphones will be open for about 15 minutes, more or less, always an interesting experiment in Zooming. And let me take this opportunity to thank our Zoom Meister, Paul Mattis, for his ongoing work in making this happen. And tonight's reading will be available on the Midstream website after a few days. And I just want to remind everybody that it was our tradition to gather before the reading at Milkweed Coffee House at 3822 Lake Street, and afterwards at Merlin's Rest at 3601 East Lake Street, the corner of Lake and 36th. And we encourage you to patronize these great establishments as much as possible in these complex times. So to start today's reading, as an invitation to settle in, I'm going to read a brief poem of mine called The Door. Imagine this poem as a door. You have opened it. You can choose to slam it shut at any time. We both know that. The poem must provide some light when you first pull it open. A faint glow from a lamp in the far corner, firelight crackling with fresh birch, the burn of the sun in eclipse, the moon in morning. Do you dare to open the door wider? When you step through, there are 3 more stanzas waiting to be opened. One sculpted, standing behind a filigreed iron gate. The next slanted, leading underground, perhaps a cellar filled with riches or giving no escape. The third is wooden, plain, and you see it is the door of your childhood home. Enter. The poem has completed its work. So now, let us turn to our readers for this evening. First, a tribute to Mike Finley. As I said, Mike was scheduled to read in September of last year before his untimely death the previous month. He was a loyal Midstream participant, and his work will be read by his wife, Rachel Frazin, and their friend, Rebecca Ramstead. Mike enjoyed the distinction of being named one of a handful of Masters of the Wired World in 1998 by Financial Times Press. Other honorees included Arthur C. Clarke, Nicholas Negroponte, Alvin Toffler, Al Gore, and Tony Blair. Mike's book with Harvey Robbins, The New Why Teams Don't Work, won the 1995 Booz Allen and Hamilton Global Business Book Award for Best Management Book published in the Americas. He won a Pushcart Prize for writing in 1985. His novel, The Rector's Tale, was awarded the Wisconsin Arts Fellowship for Best Fiction that same year. Mike was also a presenter and performance artist, entertaining thousands of people annually with his anecdotes, satires, lectures, and NPR radio commentaries. He was the author of over 140 published books. And I'll now turn the reading over to Rachel Frazin.
Thanks to Don and the folks at Midstream for honoring Mike's life through his poetry. When I met Mike in 1974, he wowed me with his wit, his intelligence, and his kindness. And on top of all that, I got a poet. Woohoo! The only problem was that the poetry he was writing at the time was often abstract and alienated. That is, when it wasn't surrealistic. And I didn't understand it very well. But with fatherhood and the encroachment of middle-class life, Mike's poetry mellowed. His humor, playfulness, and wisdom manifested. Now my problem became keeping up with all the poems he wrote. I'm beginning with a poem that was among his 3 or 4 most favorite, one of the ones that he highlighted in his online tome he called Yukon Gold, Poème de Terre, called a play on the French word for potato. This 513-page online effort kept Mike going after the death of our daughter from overdose in 2009. So poetry kind of saved his life in a lot of ways. Here's the poem, Your Human Being. Do we know what our gifts are before we give them, closer than we ever dreamed? The way the members of this family pass through one another wordlessly, where there is a bowl full of something especially for you. Let's not say plural again. Let's not speak in our waking lives again. If we can't be friends, let's be lovers. We have no time for impatience. Keep time the way you keep everything else, temporarily. For your 2 hands are only seeds of miraculous songs interrupted by silences, unfolding on the edges of what you are. The next 2 poems go back to 1978 and Mike's chapbook called Home Trees, which was published by the Minnesota Writers Publishing House. The first is The Clarinet is a Difficult Instrument. I was eating minestrone when I heard something fall outside my apartment window. It was too dark to see anything, but a pair of arms slammed shut a window on the 3rd floor of the building opposite mine. In the morning, all I could find in the yard was a bent clarinet. Its horn was dented, a key was missing, and the pawn shop sticker still said $9. It reminded me of the French explorer Antoine de la Motte Cadillac. He too had dreams, set sail up the St. Lawrence looking for China, and wound up settling in Detroit instead. Second poem from Home Trees is an absolute favorite of mine called My Bicycle. I set aside this perfect day to be with my bicycle, beautifully red. She's been mine for 3 years. I have just bought a pair of blue handle grips. Now for our free pirouettes in the sun. There is no joy like this one. Down a smooth hill and into the wind, the low sound of whistling in our spokes. I close my eyes and trace a shiver. There may not be many times like this. Now we rest in the shade of a tree, and my lovely bike, anxious to please me, guides herself in small circles. Here, the figure 8, and here, quick brakes. I'm so proud, I applaud, and my bicycle wheels sheepishly toward me, sets her handlebar in my lap. I stroke her saddle, I murmur kind words. When she stands before me, her chain sags irresistibly. Her bearings rattle deep in her hind parts. I mount her and we ride. In 2018, Mike published through his own small press, Kraken Press, a book that he titled 88 Objects of Happiness in Ascending Order. It was his tip of the hat to positive psychology. Having been diagnosed with metastatic prostate cancer, he was wending his way through his confrontation with his own mortality. And the following are poems taken from that book. 88 Objects of Happiness in Ascending Order. We'll start with number 4, The Problem of Consciousness. To be aware and to be able to contemplate a thing is such a kick. So many millions of opportunities we are allowed to have a laugh or put two things together or be astounded by a weird coincidence that seems to have no meaning, but there it is. Anyway, teasing your mind. It's like someone has dropped a hand grenade down a chimney, your chimney, and it goes off inside you and you are riddled with tickles and tingles. This is our life, a long walking with consciousness, which can cause such delight as we seek to maximize the poems spread over the hills like bright flowers while struggling to deal with the shit that enters in the same way. The pitiable state we find ourselves in, the bills in the mail we can't pay, the people who don't understand us no matter how we explain, the sad stories we tell ourselves till we believe they are true. The world doesn't care about any of this, it just is. Go beyond a pond Go stand by a pond for 20 minutes if you doubt this. The risen state, the ability to know, is our fallen state. As well, sobbing into the pillows of impossibility, all of it coming from the same good place in our heads, in our hearts, in our minds. This poem is for me. It's called Love Poem for a Woman. Mike changed this poem over about 3 or 4 decades, and this is the last iteration. I am like the piano you play that always falters up ahead, a man, but also a dog needing something to be brave for. I praise the day you gutted this fish and zipped away the offending spine. Pull me to bed with you tonight. Let me sleep this curiosity off, the way the lion feels for his mate when she brings him red meat. It's the love of the dog sleeping at the monastery gate. The Eyes of a Child. At the video store with Danielle, 3 years old, she runs up to me holding a movie. The movie is 10 with Bo Derek jogging toward you on the cover in corn braids and flesh-colored swimsuit, her breasts going byong, byong, byong. Look, Daddy, she cries out to everyone in earshot. It's Mommy! People throughout the store look at me with unprecedented respect. Little Bighorn. On our way to, on a road trip to Seattle, we stopped in Montana. Little Bighorn. I walk my boy into the battlefield. We pause in the locust grass to read a warning sign. Beware of rattlesnakes, it says. Stay on the path. My son's little hand in mine, we climb the ridge where the Sioux appeared that day like feathered cougars in the sun. I point out the crosses in the dirt. This is where the soldiers fell, understand? Yes, Daddy. The soldiers stepped off the path and the rattlesnakes bit them dead. At the Metrodome, John, our son, and I took our Brazilian house guest Wilson, pronounced Wilson, to a Twins game. Wilson didn't understand much about forced plays and stolen bases. There are football people down there, world football, that is to say. Suddenly a foul ball gets smacked and it grows as it heads our way. John reaches up and snags it one-handed and without hesitation, places the white ball in Wilson's hands. That's the kind of son I have. Icky was the name of her fish, a tetra I bought her when she was 3. We spoke to him, we touched him, and one day he died. You know, my darling, I began to explain that life is how we share our love, and it's okay to be sad, and when we lose a dear sort of friend. She finally spoke. You know, Daddy, she said, he was only a fish. Critique. I slapped the man's manuscript in my hand. The truth is, your work strikes me as entirely masturbatory. He clasped me by his shoulders, by my shoulders, and a tear rolled down his cheek. Finally, someone understands. Addicted. In the clinic waiting room, a guy enters on his mother's arm. She is the sick one, but he looks bad. Hollow-eyed, hostile, multiple tattoos. You can see the bullets under his skin. While he stares emptily at the furniture, she keeps nudging him and making funny remarks. At one point, she says, "I've got a good idea," leans over and whispers something in his ear. The man blushes and smiles and turns to look at his mother with unimaginable softness. And the last poem is Lullaby. Rest your drowsy cheek, my child, quiet on my prickling arm. Dream your dream of lapping waters, cresting on this human form. The tides are breathing you and I in your small clench and my tight heart. Tonight we fill the grave with stones and slumber in the summer's dew. In all I make are promises that can never come true. I will not give you away, my girl. I will never make you cry, nor morning find us far apart, nor this hand gone away from you. Thank you. Mike's writing is on MikeFinleyWriter.com. He put pretty much everything there, including his videos. So encourage anyone who wants to read more to go online. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks for asking me. It's an honor to read Mike's poem. He was such a dear friend and such a great community writer. I had trouble narrowing it down, but I had to read from his book, Poets Ruin Everything. And this is called Dream of Whitman. I dreamed I played basketball with the Bard of America. He spun the globe on his finger and said, "Young fellow, you must not dwell inside yourself. Step out, step up to the world where everything is revealed." I stood in the rain on the bridge with him, and he shouted into the din, "There is no modesty now, no inhibition, no deflected blows." He clasped me around the shoulders. "My son, it all just goes." And that was 2011 and 2016 from A Solution for America, a poem titled the same, A Solution for America. America is troubled by two demographics: the number of people who have given up on life and those who are yearning for someone to kill. We are proposing the creation of a strategic despair reserve, a list of people who would rather die than live: the depressed, the defeated, the terminally ill, the afraid, coupled with a list of people who feel compelled to kill people: the deranged, the furious, the disturbed. Each side in the SDR solves the other side's problem. Second Amendment types need no longer open fire on school children, as they're adults happy to take their place. No need to commit suicide afterwards, as they are given a free pass by the law. And those who have lost all hope in this country can make their exit walking down the street, lowering the shades on the great experiment. From Rhymes for Hard Times, 2010, Intuitions. Why do we hold them in such high regard when they are what got us the way that we are? And from Sugar Trap, the Nature Poetry, a poem called Beauty and Wisdom. There is a well in the iris, and everything falls in, and no man is immune from this characteristic error. Beauty looks like wisdom because the eyes are amazing. Something that wonderful must see something. And I had to choose from the 89 objects of happiness, arrayed in ascending order. Number 45, Heaven After Dark. It was the nicest surprise because you expected to always, I gotta start over, sorry. It was the nicest surprise because you expected to always be there. Okay, I'm double botched. Get twofer, let me start again. Heaven After Dark. It was the nicest surprise because you expected to always be day there. But after hours is when the fun begins and all the praise is packed away. There is music far across the lake and an occasionally applause and whistles. For long stretches, everything is impossibly funny. And you keep saying, of course, except your cheeks don't ache. And there is time for tender walks under a moon that is bigger than a house. And if you want, you can rest on the stoop, hand in hand with your life's best friend. Everyone sleeps in a heaving pile and has the most wonderful dreams. People of every ethnicity smacking their lips on one another's skin, and everyone holding on to God's pajama strings. Thank you, Mike, for all the great work you wrote.
Let's thank Rachel and Rebecca for reading Mike's wonderful poems, and thank Mike for all he has written and done. Our next reader is Janine Ollette. Her essays and stories have appeared widely, including in North American Review, Narrative, Calyx, Tupelo Quarterly, Masters Review, Writers Chronicle, December, Eckelberg Review, Penn Review, Proximity, and more. Her work is included in several anthologies, including Misaligned, Women Writing About Men, and Women's Lives, Multicultural Perspectives. And she has received fellowships from Malay Colony for the Arts and Brush Creek Foundation for the Arts. Jeanine lives with her family in Minneapolis, near the banks of the Mississippi, where she teaches writing through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop and the University of Minnesota. She is currently at work on a novel. Let's welcome Janine Ollette.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me, Midstream, and Rachel and Rebecca. That was so beautiful. So I'm going to be reading tonight. It's an excerpt from my memoir, which is forthcoming next month from Split Lip. It's called The Part That Burns. And this section is called Wingless Bodies, and it's a prose poem in 5 parts. So, Wingless Bodies. 1. Void. My father is not a swan. His bones are not hollow inside his flesh. The spaces between the phalanges of his feet are not spanned by delicate black webbing. My father has never once trumpeted. My father has no air sacs on his lungs. The doctors would have seen these when they cut through his not hollow breastbone to expose and unblock his heart. The idea is use an open artery to make a new pathway. The conclusion is close the original wound. My father's chest was pried open in Florida. Who knows how many curves of the river from Minnesota, where I stood with the phone in my hand as he lay on the table. Minnesota, where my father was born, and my mother was born, and I was born, with weak lungs and a spine that grew crooked toward the window. Florida is far from the saltless, amniotic waves of Lake Superior, far from the sulfur and stench and seduction of this river that flows through our bodies toward the sea, toward the Gulf of Mexico, where my father lives recklessly without air sacs. Air sacs and hollow bones are like life preservers. They keep swans afloat. I have never seen my father float. Partly, this is because he does not care for water. Partly, it is because I have so rarely seen my father, who, unlike a swan, did not mate for life. 2. Source. The Mississippi gurgles up from a clumsy knob and kettle landscape. Knobs are hills filled with coarse gravel and boulders dropped like loose change by the glacier's edge. Kettles are scars filled in by meltwater to make lakes and ponds and bogs. At the headwaters, I was 17 when Cyrus fucked me in a damp tent. I watched from above, recalling my stepfather's coarse hands. I bled, but it didn't hurt. It hurt, but it wasn't Cyrus's fault. It was his fault, but he was scarred, and I was scarred, and meltwater runs downhill. We could have had the baby, but we didn't. Cyrus stole stuff and sold it. Cars, drugs, guns, and something else, like that small thing inside him that was naked and open-beaked. Cyrus went to prison. The headwaters are best crossed holding a child's hand. Sometimes this threshold is no more than a rivulet you can skip over. The dust on your feet stays dry. Other times, the only way is to crawl in and lie down. Let the water rush over your supine body. Let the river run into your open mouth. Maybe you pull yourself out. I got married. I had babies. I brought them wild and uncombed to the source, where they scratched notes in careful cursive. This is the message. We are at the top of the river. Who are you? Put us back in the water. We are floating to the sea. Carefully, they burnt the edges of these scrolls, match after match. Then they launched them in glass bottles toward the Gulf, where the fresh water spills into the brine. 3. Dive. This river shapes my words, wears them down, spits them up onto the banks in piles of gravel and heaps of heavy round stones. Sometimes it hurts. I never learned how to sing alone without looking over my shoulder, not even in the shower. If you sing with me, though, I will find you. I will layer my voice on top of yours, inside of yours, like wax pooling in a candle, contained and alive in that column of light. When babies cry, we sing. Our voices pull anguish into melody, float fear and sadness between layers of sound. When the page before us is empty and untamed, we take it into our mouths. We chew it, fibrous and thick, until we can finally swallow it down. My mom was 18 and smoking True Blues when the house exploded. She was with my dad at a party, their newborn across town, maybe asleep. Gas line busted under the floorboards. 3 girlfriends on the couch, 2 dead, My mom tossed from where she sat between them, a dozen feet into the yard, shoulder ripped from socket, ear dangling from scalp. We thought she had died, my aunt says. Too many people jumping up and down, my mom says. Someone flicked a cigarette, my dad says. Enormous hollow boom of blinding light. I was 22 when my first baby arrived, silent and awake. It was a cold August and she was a perfect slippery thing, puckered and featherless, yet bigger than me, bigger than all of us, limitless. Somehow the walls did not buckle and fall. The floor and ceiling did not blow out, though she expanded everywhere, like sea, like sky. I will never forget how it felt to hold her, salty and oceanic, my firstborn daughter who breathed underwater and who would teach me finally how to dive. 4. Fire. As embryos, regeneration is our default state. We lose our knack for it though, except for stray parts, arteries, skin, lungs, isolated regions of the brain. Only the liver and severed bits of fingertips can grow all the way back. Even this could be a love story. Burns are slow to heal and can occur with or without flame. Help, I said to my husband 10 years into the blackening woods. I can't breathe. A wildfire is a large destructive blaze that spreads quickly over woodland or brush, as with divorce. Not everyone needs to breathe, my husband said. Carefully, I struck a match. Adulteress, my husband said. He summoned the god of wind. Our children froze, the light reflected in their eyes. Hide, I said. Watch it burn, he said. In the event that your hair or clothes catch fire, you must drop to the ground, cover your face, and roll to smother the flames. It hurts, I said. Smoldering is a slow, low-temperature form of combustion, as with an aftermath. Still, I love the smell of wood smoke and tobacco. I dream of the cigarettes I smoked in high school, butts tossed into the parking lot, the river, out the window of Eva's Ford Pinto, careening down Snelling Avenue, crazy with sun and Madonna's promise of a first touch. Later, hunched over a smoldering coffee can in the basement during the winter of the divorce. 1 trillion cigarette butts end up as litter every year. How many were mine? How many still are? My son is a certified wildfire fighter. Most wildfires are arson, he tells me on a scorching July night, sharp hook of moon dangling above. Sometimes it's firefighters who do it, he says, so they can earn money when fire season is slow. Fire starting is a felony, but workers need work. The air is hot and wet, alive with the smell of the river and the rising smoke of my son's Marlboro. 5. Horizon. The Arabic language has a word for love, ya aburni. It means you bury me. This is Brighton Beach on Lake Superior. Today is his first time here, the man I was not supposed to love but will someday marry, on this exact stretch of shattered volcanic rock, our kids lined up in a half circle. The air will be bright and filled with bees. Now, though, rain shoots sideways like needles. Marathoners limp onto the beach, radiant and broken. At the water's edge, we stand and stare into the mist. Mist forms when warm air meets low temperatures, as with breath exhaled into the cold. I see the horizon, he says. I don't, I say. I see us, he says. I see our kids, yours and mine. I see everything. Mist creates a visible beam of light, refracting and reflecting from suspended droplets. When you see me, I exist. When you see all of me exists. I am not your father, he says years later on a bad day. But you are, I say, my father, my stepfather, my son. You are every man I have ever known. There is no other way. Okay, he says. I have no taste for piles of small talk. The body knows what it knows, and skin remembers. I believe this man when he says he will outlive me so I can die in his arms. This is a message. Fire is not the only lick that scars. I want to burrow under the skin of this world and feel its bready heat. I am at the top of the river. I want to press my crooked backbone against the rocks. Who are you? I want his wingless body, his solid bones. The rest is feathers and ash. Please put me back in the water. I want the imperfect circle of our open mouths melting like wax through the only artery. We are, all of us, floating to the sea.
Thank you, Janine.
Thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Part of a novel that's to be published soon. That was Janine Ollette. And our next reader is John Minczeski. John is the author of 5 poetry collections, several chapbooks, and as editor, Concert at Chopin's House, a collection of Polish-American writing. With John Gozlowski, he co-edited a second version of Concert containing all new material. It was published in translation this past year in Poland. Recent poems have appeared in Atticus Review, Chattahoochee, Cortland Review, Harvard Review. Oh, excuse me, I just lost my place. Recent poems have appeared in Atticus Review, Chattahoochee, Cortland Review, Harvard Review, The New Yorker, Shadowgraph, Tampa Review, and elsewhere. A graduate of the Warren Wilson Program for Writers, he has worked as a poet in the schools, taught in community writing programs, and as an adjunct at various colleges and universities around the Twin Cities. Join me in welcoming John Minczeski.
Thank you, Don. And thank you, fellow readers. It's great to be on Zoom with you. Thank you, Paul, for kind of working all the bugs out. And Mike Finley. I first met Mike about 50 years ago, and this is the first time we've sort of read together. I'm going to be reading 7 poems. They're fairly short, but I will warn you when I'm coming toward the end so you can rejoice. And I'm not going to be saying anything about the poems. They're fairly self-explanatory. Wild turkeys during the insurrection. The toms are fighting, their tails fanned, chests puffed. First, they colonized the neighborhood. Now the spurs are out. The neck hold, the beak grab. 3 of them, a blood trinity of turkeys, 3 houses in from serious traffic. Do they leave a corpse in a side yard for predators to tend? Is it a stripping of rank? They don't seem to notice my gawking, unseemly as it is, as one bends another down, squawks stabbing the morning, as some drive to work, the rough ice giving some traction, the cold beginning to seep through my boot soles. Day before Thanksgiving. He sat on a milk crate as he butchered a duck. Cleaver, chef's knife, a steaming tub before him for the wings and feet and what not. His twins rode a tricycle and a scooter around the driveway, circles within circles. We are driven by hungers we can barely name. The day was unlabored breathing, the lingering taste of au gratin with a proper crust. Thanksgiving is a complexity of knots, lockdowns, and televised murder, 2 cops holding the man's legs, another cop holding back citizens trying to stop it, controlling, he said, the crowd. I wasn't there on Memorial Day, and now it's months on. Tell me you cannot tell a peaceful protester from someone trying to start a war. Today, walking to the neighborhood, I listened to clusters of shots from the Maplewood firing range. I don't feel I'm a target often. Only at times, a certain look says, keep my hands in view, no sudden moves. An older sister watched the twins, speaking a tonal language heavy with vowels. The world swallows some more slowly than others. Some it swallows whole. Snowy owl. It swept across the road, feathers flared at the tip like fingers, legs and talons trailing. It was a steady glide, the streamlined curve of its back, wings that barely moved. Life is stamina, is ragweed and goldenrod in the field, the morning steeping in its cup. We don't always notice perfection flying into a migrant wind. If we blurted paraclete, would anyone call it an accident? In my head, my late friend reads things I never knew I loved in his calm, raspy voice. From the pond to a patch of prairie to the woods beyond, any angel could be as dangerous. J. The windmill didn't squeak as it narrowed toward the top, a network of blades among the sugar maples. It hummed, it groaned, bearings and grease and gears working the pump shaft. The gerrymandered wind combed wheat against the nap. My brother disappeared hours. He might have wished it days, if not a life, in the woods and marsh. Silence was barn smell and wasps in the sugar of rotting apples, our voices breaking in words like Carmichael, New Carlisle. My grandmother tracked my brother through the network of jays calling, a sound like well water in a dented metal cup, a blue-gray shimmer at the edge of family. On silence. This is dedicated to Jim Heinen. The open canister of afternoon that's mostly empty. Why are no birds singing? A friend asked, socially distanced on our deck. Fingers to mouth, he whistled, trying to start a dialogue with cardinals. The questions and exclamations he tossed out went unanswered. I might have heard an eagle yesterday. When I looked, the air was clear. They're disgusted with us. They're meeting silence with silence, tossing it back by the shovelful. Alone dragonflies, sideways jags, like a trout nosing into the current, is what we get. A vacuum excavator truck down the block is all the drone we have, maybe all we deserve. And the afternoon's abandoned like a car with the plates removed, like squatters' rights. The bleeding hearts have pulled into themselves. Starlings have clustered elsewhere to spread their gossip. 2 more poems. This is a phrase that was current this past year, doom scrolling. The keyboard's worn and pitted from nails digging in, from royal manuals and typing class, speed exercises, the lazy red dog, etc. The E in words like etc., like greed. I want updates in light speed. How many suffered at the rally? The dope on the daily scandal, more fake anguish over the emails. The dire warnings like danger bobbers anchored off the pier. Fishing with Jim at Lake Josephine, the lifeguard said a kid got attacked by a muskie inside the swimming area. 100 stitches to close up his foot. Teeth bared, headlines full of acid reflux. When I dream of airliners, they crash. I rush to help the survivors. There are survivors. Only the eyes moving while dreaming. The rest remains in a temporary state of paralysis. I am in a temporary state, clawing at the keys. The world ends and ends and ends. Columnists, mavens, town criers hawk the crazy algebra of X, then Y. Snake oil profits swirl across the street in the fall gusts. And the last poem, On Burnishing My Soul. I forgive the streets having grown cold overnight, and grass for turning brown. I forgive the showers that started this morning at 10:30, the rain pelting as it counted down to 0. I forgive 0. I forgive leaves for being themselves. Others assign a harsher penance, gathering them into piles, bagging and hauling them to the compost site. Burning is the worst, filling the neighborhood with a smell meant for purgatory. I forgive myself for loving leaves that layer the ground, to break even by spring. I forgive Alvaro for dying, sometimes coming back at night to give dictation. I forgive the ridges on my thumbnail and the callus on my toe. I forgive the afterlife with its cobbled streets and crowded bars at night. I forgive the spirits for their habit of reading minds, for laughing at jokes before the punchline. I forgive their snooping on unspoken thoughts, their interminable reports, the final assessment they are constantly revising. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That was John Minczeski. Our final reader for tonight is Norita Dittberner-Jax. She's the author of 6 collections of poetry, most recently, Now I Live Among Old Trees, from which she will be reading tonight. Her last collection, Crossing the Waters, 2017 from Noden Press, won the Midwest Book Award in Poetry. Norita has won awards and fellowships for her work, including several nominations for a Pushcart Prize, a Jerome Travel and Study Grant, and recognition by the Minnesota State Arts Board and the Humanities Commission. Norita taught in various capacities, the Writers and Artists in the Schools program, the Perpich Center for the Arts, and St. Paul Public Schools. She's a poetry editor for Redbird Chapbooks. Norita is a native of St. Paul, where she lives among a generosity of trees. Please join me in welcoming Norita Dittberner-Jax.
Well, I'm delighted to be here to read with my old friend, John Mancheski. We were young poets together. And such fine work we're hearing tonight. And it's an honor for me to be here on the night of the tribute to Mike Finley. He was a splendid spirit. And we don't get together now. So But the next time we're able to get together and go to readings, and we are really going to miss Mike Finley not being there. I'm going to read from Now I Live Among Old Trees, which has many poems from about the death of my husband, Eugene Letters, but many tree poems too. The first poem I'm going to read is a second section in a book is called the Eugene Letters. And I'm going to read number 7. My dear Eugene, I like to sit alone in a church, not an intimate space, nothing convivial, but old, magisterial, a terrible crucifix, cold comfort. I'm starting over, trying to build a life for myself instead of the life we had. I've moved to a new home with no memory of you, the hall and doorway too narrow for the wheelchair. In the years of your sickness, I didn't see myself aging until you were gone. Tell me, love, do you know, and would you say, if there is time to make a new life? Or should I just stay home with your photo in every room? To make a dwelling. The palette we shared in Warsaw, the golden room in Istanbul, bright even at night from the lights of Hagia Sophia, the gardens of Goodrich where we spent our years. As a child, I played house on the front porch with my dollies. In autumn, houses of fallen leaves in the side yard, a passion for houses, for dwellings. Now I make a new home. I keep patterns you had, ice cream every night, and now a reading chair and ottoman, books piled with odd pieces of paper for bookmarks. A personal history of trees. The only tree of importance growing up was the apple tree in the backyard, a big Frogtown apple tree. This was before I knew the order of apples. My dad fashioned an apple picker made from an open cage attached to a pole, an elaborate contraption for little reward. The apples were no good, Dad said, and I don't remember that we ever did anything with them, but the tree was fragrant and a beauty in blossom. The apple tree was a natural backdrop for family pictures, although there aren't many. I posed there in my cap and gown. The tree stood for some stability and grace, a little architecture in the backyard. Later on, my dad began pruning it back until finally he chopped it down. A loss. In the title poem, Now I Live Among Old Trees. The college could have been another country. Unfamiliar streets, so many beautiful trees, old trees, trees allowed to widen into sky, bluer in that part of town. I took the bus until I met the others who didn't fit in, alone as I was, watching the ranks of girls hug each other, at ease among such trees. Not fitting in, that was our bond, stuck together, smoking cigarettes, studying for tests in the smoker, not the library, each book, like the trees, settled and quiet. I went to a fine school for women and graduated, thinking privilege belonged to others. Like an arrow, my life took off. The friends who helped me in the crossing, I never saw them again. I never did. and a poem from my mother, whose birthday was this week. She is long gone, but this poem is called My Mother Washing Clothes. She stirred the cauldron with a stick, fed each piece to the wringer, which snapped in reverse, whirling like the devil. Possessed, she said. When the first load was ready, she carried the basket, weighty with water, out of the darkness into the backyard, where she hung them in elaborate order. Shirts on the first line, starched as suitors. Dresses, dignified skirts on the second. But on the third line, in the center, she hung the underwear, where it would never be seen from the street. Ample and white, it dried soft between the lines of stiffening linen and the first defense of the shirts. In my mother's government, small things were protected. The devil lived in the washer. On Sunday night, I watched the new PBS series, All Creatures Great and Small. And the close-up of the beautiful faces of the animals reminded me of the farm that my husband owned, a hobby farm, when we were going together. Animal life. I saw the farm for the first time on an autumn evening. You parked the car near an oak tree where I saw an apparition, 13 turkeys roosting in its branches. In the morning, 7 horses, some of them named for mystics, Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena. A city girl, I came to love their midnight eyes, the long ridge of nose, the warmth of their breathing. Some evenings, cows from the next farm lumbered in just to be near us, faces solemn as judges. Married, we moved between farm and city. I had a dog for the first time, Muffin, part beagle, the color of winter. 2. The only animals now are the ones we see from the window or on walks, you in the wheelchair. You call my wig on the headstand, the little rabbit, and a print of Durer's hair hangs on the wall in our bedroom, a close-up of the young one in clover darting across the green. And the last piece I'm going to read is a piece of prose called Peace House. It isn't in the book. It was just published in an anthology. Peace House is a place of hospitality for street people in Minneapolis on Portland Avenue. It is celebrating its 30th or 35th anniversary. And the piece is about the old building. There's a new building now, but my husband Gene was the person that conducted the discussion and meditation on Fridays. So Peace House. The only building left standing on the block next to the freeway. Inside, folding chairs line the room, people already sitting, moving around, getting coffee. On the walls are the rules. What will get you thrown out and for how long? Everything is simple here and unadorned, except for a few tired Christmas decorations. But here there's light and heat, and soon there will be food. The discussion is about to begin. Thomas locks the door so there is no interruption, unless someone bangs on it, angry at missing the deadline. But for now, it's peaceful. No one's drunk or high. One man sleeps, but he's not snoring, and the rest seem alert. They all have hats and gloves, gifts of a church organization. Now the leader asks for news, and Sharon says how 3 people who were lighting their cigarettes in the street at dawn were hit by a truck. Her husband is one of them, and she's looking for a ride to the hospital. The leader says he'll give her a lift. Then the topic for discussion, the giving of gifts, the complications of giving and receiving. So many of those gathered have broken and missing teeth, rheumy eyes, and bodies older than their years. But they talk about the uneasy transaction of receiving gifts. Suddenly, Stanley starts speaking, his voice ringing out, his mind ablaze. He says that he always knows when the spirit is wrong behind a gift, but he doesn't let that stop him. I let the Lord turn it around. The Lord turns it around. The leader directs the traffic of their voices, and they all get heard. It's his birthday, and so they sing the birthday song that everyone knows. Then Al brings platters of fried chicken, bowls of potatoes and salad, trays of Christmas cookies, and sets them on low tables in the middle of the room. After lunch, the door is unlocked and the stragglers come in out of the cold. Thank you. It's been delightful to be here.
Thank you, Norita. Let's all thank Norita with our visual applause. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Our readers again were Rachel Frazin and Rebecca Ramsden, who read the work of Mike Finley, and Janine Ollette, John Minczeski, and Norita Dittberner-Jax. Please join us again in February 11th. The readers are Roseanne Lloyd, Leroy Sorensen, Carol Rux, and a player to be named later.